Hey, everybody. Welcome back to That Trippi Show with Joe Trippi and Alex Shashel. Yes, you can hear it is not Joe Trippi reading this intro. It is I, Alex. This week, Joe is on the road. He's in Alabama with Doug Jones. For once, I'm covering for him rather than him covering for me, which has happened a lot this year. Tons to get into this week anyway. We didn't want to miss one. We had primaries in Florida, Alaska, a bunch of good questions from you. We'll get into all of that, but I can't do it alone. So put out the bad signal this week. We welcome our friend Reed Galen back to the show and help me break it all down. Reed, thanks for being here, brother.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Great to be back.
Yeah, I mean, if we get to it, we may discuss what you and I were discussing pre-show about whether it's better to be inside or outside. But let's get to the primaries first. Big one, I think that people are probably still wondering what the hell happened was Florida. Obviously, Alex Vindman lost to Angie Nixon. I think it ended up being like 56-44. He lost by 12, despite having a 16-1 spending fundraising advantage. Reed, what happened, man?
I think we have to think about this. There's this idea of dialectical thinking. Instead of but, you say and. Angie won, and Alex ran a bad campaign. And those two things go together, which is Vindman raised $16 million. As of his last report, which would have been through June 30th, he still had like almost $8 million on hand. So they were making an assumption that they were going to roll through this primary and they needed this money to stay viable financially through the fall campaign. And it's a very late primary. I think a couple of issues. One is that, I've known Alex since 2020, after he testified against Trump in the impeachment, but I don't think anybody ever thought of him as a Floridian. So I think that's part of it. Secondly, and I think we're learning this, and I say this as someone who's sort of a plank holding member of the Never Trump tribe, it's not enough. Right. That gets you the donor class, but the donor class doesn't vote for you, right? The donor class in Sarasota only has so many votes. The donor class in New York or DC or San Francisco, LA, wherever it is, they may love you for your resistance, but it doesn't necessarily translate to votes. Right. The last piece is, I would say, and this goes to what Florida is, I don't think that even if Vindman had cleared the primary, he had any chance of winning. It's still a very Republican state. But I think I say that in the same breath with someone like a David Jolly, who also won his primary.
Well, I wanted to get there, yeah.
Yeah, and is different a Democrat as he could be from Angie Nixon, and they both won. So I think that campaigns do matter. Good campaigns that are well run and have a good operation tend to win, and bad campaigns with half-assed candidates, even if they have more money, Alex, tend to lose.
Well, I'm glad you brought up David Jolly. I mean, he crushed everybody in the primary. You look at, and I'm sure I'm excited to get Joe's perspective when he's back on. So we'll mark this one down. But there are a bunch of people that on the same ticket, on the same ballot, looked at a former Republican for governor and said, yeah, I want that. And they looked at a socialist and said, yeah, I want that too. So it's an interesting conundrum for the Democratic Party. My initial take, I think they actually kind of help each other in a weird way. Neither of them are the establishment anymore. Neither of them are, which I think is the most important thing. And she can energize the base in a way that as good of a campaigner as David Jolly is, that kind of socialist Bernie bro energy is not something he can or should summon, quite frankly. So I think she probably helps him more than the other way around, just in terms of enthusiasm. But I think that's an interesting experiment they're running in a state that should be like 5 or 6 states realistically. I mean, that's the other part of this. If you look at breaking down where you mentioned Sarasota, but North Florida is basically,
Georgia.
South Georgia, Alabama. It's basically Alabama.
Right.
And then you have Miami, Central Florida. I mean, I think of all the states I have my eye on this cycle, other than like Alaska and Iowa for various Senate experiment reasons, I think Florida is just going to be fascinating in terms of, because we talked about this so much, and you have been on the show talking about what happened after 2024, talking about how like Republicans all of a sudden thought Latinos were with them forever, or MAGA thought Latinos were with them forever, redistricted the hell out of Texas to try to get it. that obviously is kind of blowing up in their faces right now. So interesting to see where that goes. Speaking of which, Cook moved Texas Senate to a toss up. It was lean Republican. It feels like Cook's a little behind this cycle. I think they also moved Iowa to a toss up, and I think Iowa Gov to a lean D for Rob Sand.
Saw
But
that today. Yeah.
it's none of those ratings surprise. Again, it feels like they're like 6 weeks behind on some of this stuff. I don't know.
I mean, look, I went to high school and college in Texas. I worked for then Governor George W. Bush in 1998, right? And I think 1994 was the last time a Democrat won a statewide race of any kind. So we're talking 30 plus years, Alex. I think Tallarico, is doing a great job. Um, but I'm not being a naysayer, but I am being a healthy skeptic, which is I will believe it when I see it. And it's not just because it's Texas, but also because I don't have any confidence whatsoever that Greg Abbott and ICE and all of the other thugs that really own power down there will not do everything they can to make voting more difficult for the
Oh,
people
of
who should
course.
vote for Tallarico. I mean, I could make an argument that we should not be surprised if you see a couple of DPS cars parked on either side of the one drop box in Harris County and the one drop box in Dallas County, which not only have millions of people, millions of voters, but also heavily Black communities and heavily Democratic communities. And so I have no doubt that they will try and rig the game, as I think they tried to in the primary, where you saw some weirdness in some Dallas precincts.
What I'm gonna Texas is gonna be interesting for that reason, but again, big state. But again, to your point, they control so much of the institutional firepower, being able to bring in your ISIS or the local police. I mean, hell, there are a lot of militias that could just be showing up, open carry with very large guns too. I mean, and by the way, it's that will be just as organized as calling in ICE. So back to Vindman for a second, back to all the races you and I have been talking about offline for weeks. Vindman had all the money in the world, didn't matter. We've seen this a couple times throughout the country this cycle where you look at a place like Michigan where APAC dumped somewhere between 30 and 50 million dollars and Haley Stevens is not the nominee for Senate. How much it's the question isn't does money still matter, but how much does money matter? Is it less now?
So I've always thought that money buys you options, not victory. The more money you have, the more things you can do. Um, and in a contested race, having more is always better. Of course, if we consider, Alex, that 90% of our congressional districts are gerrymandered, you're going to get all the money in the world anyway. You're probably going to win. But when it's a close race, or it should be a close race, then candidates and campaigns do matter. And in Michigan, I think it's an interesting case because the establishment with Haley Stevens they couldn't win on the candidate, right? She just wasn't comparatively a good candidate like Syed is. So they tried to go with blunt force. In Florida, they got caught flat footed because they didn't think there was any way Alex could lose. So they just weren't paying attention to Nixon. Now, that being said, if they thought Nixon was a threat, do I think they would have come in on her? I don't, because Florida, like nobody's like, oh, Florida's a toss-up state, right? It's just not. But
Right.
I think that the other part is that they had the money, Alex, but they didn't spend it. And you have to spend the money to win. And you've seen some of these reports that it was a very arrogant campaign, that they didn't even acknowledge that Nixon was running. And if you've been a legislator who has very deep connections with labor and the Black community, and other other groups that have built-in operations of their own, then you could see how somebody who raises less than $1 million beats somebody who raised 16 million. But here's the other part. I think I saw that he spent $2 million on television. Like, where the hell did all the money go?
Right.
And
Well, and
that's one thing I said I got in trouble, is and I'm not comparing the candidates, I'm comparing the consultants here, Alex. All of the establishment went crazy for these people who recruited Graham Plattner in Maine. How dare he, and he blew up everything. They should be drummed out of the party. Well, these people recruited Alex, then they raised $16 million and they lost. Like, where the hell's all the money?
right.
Right? Like, did they all buy houses on 30A? Like, maybe they did. But that's my point, is like, if you're gonna run a campaign, then you've got to tell the candidate, like, this is how we're going to win, and you can't take anything for granted. And I think they did all of those things. And I, unfortunately for Alex, I think he will be a case study in how not to run a campaign.
Well, I think if you look at the broader environment this year and you wonder how does Nixon win and on the same ballot as Jolly with the same people voting for both? How does, and Joe and I talked about this last week, how does Francesca Hong not win in Wisconsin, but Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota? Like, you start adding it all up. I do still think, I feel like electability is now like so far down on the list of what primary voters have told us actually matters now.
Right.
Like the argument, I mean, Haley Stevens tried to make that argument lost. Like this is I still feel like I don't care how electable or unelectable you are. If you're in office right now, that is a huge anchor around your neck. It's not, I think personally, it's less progressive versus not progressive and more just, do people feel you are a change or you are the same?
Correct. And I will make I guess it will be a reflection, not a prediction, Alex. I reflect that if Hong doesn't go and do those national media hits with the craziness about Thanksgiving and everything, she probably wins.
Right. It was a half point. She absolutely does. Yeah.
Right. And so that goes back to, in a close race with close resources, the better candidate will win. If she had just stayed home, if she had said, thanks, but no thanks, I'll talk to you in the general,
Right.
right? She maybe wins. And then you get unfortunately, I'm blanking on his name, the gentleman that won, the Milwaukee
Crowley.
County
Joe
Crowley, who wins. And what's the first ad by the crazy Republican? Like, Crowley's pro AI data center. They get outflanked like on day one. It just,
Right.
so like, Hong wasn't much of a candidate. Sounds like she had a shoestring campaign, but Crowley doesn't seem much better either. But what's amazing to me is, with all of the work that has been done institutionally in Wisconsin over let's say the last 10 years, that got, Ben Wickler to the pantheon of state party chairs and writing books and 2 Supreme Court justices over the line. Like, these were the options they had for governor? Really?
Well, and obviously the Mandela Barnes was kind of the anointed one, and that didn't work. But again, it's kind of in the like, how did it get so far? That's what I kept asking with Plattner. Again, I know Mandela Barnes had some different questions, but it gets back. It gets back
but
to
Plattner. Let me just say this with Plattner. To your point, all of the things about him accepted, not accepted, but accepted. He still ran a sitting governor out of a primary.
Right. Because people wanted the change.
Right.
I mean, Janet Mills is essentially the avatar for the same old, same. I mean, quite literally the same old, same old.
Yeah.
And I mean, she basically dropped out, and then like the next day, what is it? Vetoed the anti-data center bill that Maine was trying to pass, or vice versa. It was like,
yeah. Well, look, I mean, she's going to be on the board of something. Her grandkids or college is going to be paid for, right? Like, it'll be great. Like, because at that point, what difference does it make to her?
So Joe and I keep talking about, and I want to zoom out slightly. This is one of my favorite questions we haven't been able to get to in the last couple of weeks, and I thought you'd be a very good person to ask this. So zooming out a little bit, Joe and I keep talking about how the Republican brand is in trouble, but this question from Cindy in Missouri is, isn't the Democratic brand still pretty toxic with voters? I have 3 questions for you, and I haven't read any of those long autopsy reports, which actually, Cindy, I haven't read much of either. Joe and I had to do a deep dive on them and really did not enjoy it. Memory hold them at all. Reed, from your view in the, I'm not going to call them cheap seats, but the not party seats, how did it get this bad for Democrats brand-wise in 2026 when, if you look at all the polling, the Democratic brand is still pretty toxic with voters?
So I'm lucky enough right now to be able to sit behind home plate, right? I get to see the whole field. If we're going to use a baseball metaphor. So I think it was late April, it was at Pew, or one of the big polling outfits ran a survey. 47% of American voters consider themselves independent. 27% consider themselves Democrats. 27% of them consider themselves Republicans. So you now have about a quarter of the country that's dedicated to either party. I think, unlike probably a decade ago, Alex, when you were first getting started and I still lived in California, if you were an independent, you were somebody who just didn't like the label anymore. But on election day, you're probably still going to go home, right?
Yep.
I think that's probably still mostly the case, or in the plurality of options, probably still the case. But I think you are seeing that independent voters now are, first, I think they're completely negatively polarized, which is they're now motivated by frustration and anger. So if you're the out party, you're probably going to pick those people up. I don't know that there's much persuasion left to be done, if that makes
Right.
sense. Which is,
No,
I think
it's
that with the independents, it's that guy's terrible and he's in office, you should vote for me. And with the base, it's you got to get out, you got to get out, you got to get out. But I think this is the problem with the Democrats. Is my observation of the last almost 7 years is I have this expression and it's not kind. Republicans make promises they have every intention of keeping, and Democrats make promises they have no intention of keeping. And so let's take recently, I think it was on Meet the Press as we're recording this last weekend. Kristen Welker asks Minority Leader, would-be Speaker Hakeem Jeffries about Medicare for All. He won't go anywhere near it, right? He won't go anywhere near it because he is being told it's a toxic political thing, and he doesn't want it. Let's be clear, like as Speaker, he will not push it. Now, I don't know, Alex, if Medicare for All is the answer to America's vast healthcare issues. But what I know is when the guy who's supposed to be one of the leaders of the party poo-poos something that so many primary and base voters really believe in,
right. Or
it makes
came
it
out
very
explicitly to support. Yeah.
right. It's very difficult to convince those people that you really care about them. And that's what I've seen on the road as I've traveled, these past few years is Democratic base voters don't believe the party cares about them. And I don't disagree with them. And the things they, and here's the other part is the Democratic Party wants to call itself the party of working people, but it is not. It is not. It is the party of college educated people, in the urban areas and the suburbs. Remember, I think Chuck Schumer infamously said, we can lose, if for every rural voter we lose, we'll pick up 2 in the suburbs. Like, how's that worked out? Not to mention how condescending, right? But you've just seeded parts of the country that would be willing to listen, but you have now done so little for so many people for so long. It's like, what difference does it make? And so that's, I think, to me, Alex, that's the difference between, look, I think Democrats will do well this fall. They could do unbelievably well if they had a coalition of people who were of the middle and of the left who all agreed on things. But they are 2 parties living under one name, and it is an unhappy tent, right? This is a circus that people like. If I'm on one side of the circus tent and you're on the other, like, we're not talking to each other, right? We're going to our sides, and we don't want to. And I want to see the elephants, and you want to see the clowns. And when the clowns come up, I'm going like this, right? And I'll stop with the tortured circus metaphor, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
Well, on the clown note, I mean, there was an anonymous quote from a Republican operative who, could have been one of about 4 people, but said something like, this election will be about who voters hate more, not who they love, as a way to kind of like almost, I think they were trying to be more confident in what happens to the control of Congress. I think it was in response to a bunch of polls showing that they're going to get totally annihilated, like the generic being somewhere between. It was the Fox News generic it's now at 8.
Yeah.
Like, but even okay, this is my problem with that statement. In a hate election or a love election, which side do you want to be on? With gas prices going up, the economy tanking for most of working people, et cetera. It kind of, to Cindy's question, I'm not sure the Democratic brand really matters this year. It's a change election, not a brand election.
It is, but it could be both. And the reason it's not is because the people who, at least in my belief, Alex, is that the people who are in charge back in Washington have an expectation that they will be in charge, and they will take all the wrong lessons from it, which is they really don't have any desire for massive change. They don't have any desire to do anything or even propose anything which I think would be considered transformative or transformational. They want to be in charge because they think they're smart enough to be in charge. And then here's what's going to happen. Let's say that Hakeem Jeffries takes the speaker's gavel. You'll have a lot of celebration about that for the first 2 or 3 weeks. And then, you know what's going to happen? candidates are going to start dropping into South Carolina and New Hampshire and New Mexico. And you know what they're going to say? Well, we can't get out in front of the presidential candidates, right? That one of them is going to be the leader of the party. So we just have to stay away from that. And then you're going to have demands from some activists about you have to impeach him again, even though he will not be convicted, right? And so I think what you're going to see is you're going to have a big, deep breath happen on November 4th, and then you're going to have a bunch of angry, frustrated, both donors and voters, who say, okay, well, we elected you to do something and you're not doing
Right.
anything. But of course, they didn't get elected to do anything. They're just getting elected because they're not the Republicans.
Well, my favorite comments this week, too, one, I think Politico did an analysis that now gas prices are all in Democratic ads, not Republican ads. But my favorite one is I think Besant went on CNBC or wherever he was on earlier today and said, "Oh, it doesn't matter if the deficit reaches $40 billion, we'll just outgrow it." It's just very interesting. The national deficit is now not going to matter until January of 2029, when if a Democrat wins the presidency. All of a sudden, we're going to hear much more about the debt and the deficit. But it seems like in this current environment, they don't really care about it anymore. It's just a funny flip. Everything's a weird flip this year, man. All of it.
So, somebody, I don't remember where I was, but somebody said something about Republicans and deficits. And it was actually Dick Cheney that said Ronald Reagan taught us deficits don't matter. When Reagan ran up the deficit, when he slashed taxes from 80% to 37% or whatever it was, and then he undid all these other things, and then he ran up deficits on military spending. And he won 49 states in 1984, right? George W. Bush wins in 1988. And so the deficit became something that I think, first of all, $40 trillion. I looked this up. Like, if you translated that into miles, like, you'd go past like the closest star, right, in light years, right? I mean, it's just something crazy. But I think the other part is, first and foremost, this whole idea of, well, outgrow the deficit. Like, first of all, that's Republican dogma going back to the early
Right.
1980s, right? That has never proven out, has never been true. Except, again, in that first few years of the Reagan administration, when you just had so much more money suddenly that had been cooped up going to government or being hidden, now going into buying boats or whatever, right? But the debt is one of those things where we might not get to January of 2029, right? The debt is all predicated on somebody that actually wants to keep buying it from us. And that's what we're also seeing, Alex. I'm not an economics guy, but the yields on these things, the price that people want, the amount of interest that people want to buy our debt is going up. It went down for like 12 hours yesterday, right, because of some gimmick, and now it's back up again. And so between that, that means borrowing is going to be higher for every American, right? People already can't afford homes. Wages are flat. And so I think this is where, to me, I think the Democrats are missing a huge opportunity to say how things have worked for the last 45 years does not work anymore. And we've got to do something different. And you hear people like Rahm Emanuel and Gavin Newsom paying lip service to it, but acknowledging it and actually doing something about it or proposing to do something about it are two entirely different things.
So I've got one more fun question before we let our listeners go for the week. And I thinking about this when I was writing what the hell we try to talk about this week. What are the single races you're looking at this year that will tell you where the country is headed going into 2028? I've got 5. While you think of your answer, I will be very quick on them. I think you mentioned El Sayed in Michigan. I think the Michigan Senate race is fascinating. Can a movement progressive who unseated an establishment candidate go ahead and win? I think he's probably favored right now. I absolutely think he can win that. I think Minnesota Senate candidate. I think Minnesota is interesting too, because Minnesota, for a little bit, we were starting to lurch towards, if you recall, in 2024, people were worried about whether Kamala Harris would win Minnesota. Obviously, that ended up not being true, but they should have worried about a lot of other places. Wisconsin governor, I know you mentioned that one. Can Joe Crowley get his act together? I think Tallarico is a fascinating one because I kind of think that's that to me, I think Texas is the truly battlegroundiest of the Senate races right now. If you could pick one actual down the line coin flip. I think right now it's Texas, and then I think Alaska Senate to see. Obviously, we didn't even talk about it this week, but Peltola getting more votes than Sullivan in that matchup. It's an interesting way they do it now. It goes to ranked choice, but it, basically all of them against a bunch of also rans, and Peltola got more turnout, which is I think Democrats should be very encouraged by. So those are my five, man. You got any I missed? Any I should be thinking
Um,
about differently?
I think I want to go back to Alaska for a second. The other state that I'm very interested in is North Carolina. I think that there are a lot. I mean, I think that they'll be fine in the Senate race there with Cooper. But I think that if Cooper can win by enough, and Anderson Cooper and the state party there have been incredible, right? Or Anderson Clayton, excuse me, as the state party chair. I did an event with her in New York in July. She is terrific. She has a plan. They are, everybody could be better funded, but she is well funded, and they are working not only on congressional races, but also very, very hard on legislative races to try and get those chambers back. I mean, people sleep on how crazy the Republican legislature is in North Carolina, but it is really cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. In Alaska, um, Peltola is a true literal native, right? Sullivan is not. Now his wife is, and what's interesting about, I mean, Alaska's such a fascinating place in its own right, but like Peltola's family probably goes back like 25,000 years or something, right? Like it's a very interesting thing. But I did hear from a friend of mine who still does work in Republican politics, that they are worried about Sullivan, that he is not really breaking through, that Peltola is really discussing the issues, whether or not that's fisheries, oil and gas, open space, all of the things there that Alaskan is, again, it's such a unique place. And Sullivan's just trying to keep up. And now he's like the outsider and all this other silliness. When, yeah, I mean, he's from Ohio or whatever. I mean, historical footnote, Alex, I did debate prep for him in 2014, and talk about a jerk. That guy was a jerk of all jerks. I mean, he was just as condescending and gross as he could be. And so we worked a little bit against him in 20. I hope he loses. I don't like him at all. And then I think the other part, talking to another Republican friend of mine that I think will be really interesting. We've talked about what Democrats need to do. We haven't talked too much about the Republican ledger. Is one buddy of mine who's very, very, he does a lot of Republican campaigns, said his biggest worry is that there are 10% of Republican voters who are only for Trump. They only show up when he's on the ballot. And even when they show up when he's on the ballot, they don't vote down ballot. And so that in a lot of places could be the margin between victory and defeat, because they don't care about any of these people. Frankly, Trump doesn't care about any of these people. So if you add 10% of a given Republican electorate and take them out, and then you add to them guys like I used to be, and let's say 5 or 10% of them stay home, it makes it very difficult, and even say a +5, +7 district for a Republican to get over the line, because they just won't have enough votes.
Well, and they're not going to turn out. So if you're taking that turns into Joe and I keep harping on the 18% or so of Republicans that didn't vote for Trump in 2024 in primaries. That 18% is not only not really excited this cycle, and now it's obviously growing if you look at his numbers with independents. I mean, some of the polling I've seen out of places like Florida has Donald's in like the low 30s with independents, which
Yeah,
you could, if that happens, this race is over. Like
right.
David Jolly's the next governor. But if you add the fact that Trump and MAGA are just poisoned with independents everywhere right now, I think he might be at 21 nationally, according to The Economist. And
Yeah.
Joe points out every week that there's like 2 or 3 states that he's still positive in. You add all that up, and this is only trending in one direction. Whether it's a blowout like we think or a huge blowout like you think it could be, it to me it's still trending in one direction.
No, I think you're right, and this is the unfortunate piece, is all of the other indicators, mostly economic, about what's going on are bad and likely to get worse in the next 80 some days. Trump is not going to get out of Iran anytime soon. And this is the one thing Democrats are talking about gas prices. I would also encourage them to talk about diesel prices, because diesel is the thing that makes trucks go from point A to point B. Diesel is the thing that makes a tractor turn the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of those things is an input that is now much higher which ultimately streams all the way down to us at the grocery store or whatever else it is we're buying or consuming. And it's not going to get better. And the one thing I would say is, in a lot of these races, I would frankly leave Trump out, Alex. I would say this war, right? I mean, don't give a Republican something to hide behind. Like I think in a lot of races, he's already baked in because he's so ubiquitous. So if you're a Democratic voter who's turning out, like you already hate Trump. If you're an independent voter who's turning out, like you've already said, like I'm done with this guy. And I don't know, and I don't think, and I think this is unfortunate. I don't think there's a lot of or any appreciable number of Republicans who are going to cross the line. Maybe like a guy like Jolly, maybe could,
No,
or
I mean,
or a candidate
it's
like
not cross the
Peltola.
line; it's staying home.
Right, but I'm saying that I don't think there's many. I don't know how many ticket splitters there are going to be. Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so I think that the Republicans have a major turnout problem, and you saw right yesterday, I think, as we're recording this, the NRSC basically sent out the bat signal to all the AI super PACs to say, "Hey,
saying please defend yourselves. It's really
please defend
bad."
yourself." I mean,
Glad you brought that one up.
What's been interesting, if I spend too much time on Twitter, but what you've seen is you can see the charm offensive has begun, and and the PR rebuttals have begun because you start to see these people who like don't normally talk about AI, or if they do, it's in a questioning manner, are now like, AI equals cancer cures, and if you're not for AI, you're for cancer and all this, and you're just like, okay. So they're as ham-handed at this as they were about talking about it in the first place.
So at this point in the show, I usually tell Joe we're done, but we are just about out of time, Reed. I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything we can plug for you today before you head out? What are you going to be doing between now and the election?
Look, the union, join the union.us. We'll still be out there pounding the pavement, helping our 100 partner organizations, whether or not it's voter registration, poll watchers, get out the vote, phone calls, texts. So if you're interested in helping us out there, go to jointheunion.us. And then later this fall, actually not even later this fall, next month, I'll be launching officially a new organization called Civic Forum. That's at civicforum.org. And a lot of what I want to do there, Alex, is bring new voices and new ideas to places that don't often get them. So I want them, we see too many, quote unquote smart people who sit on the stage in New York City or at the Milken Conference in Los Angeles and tell us all how the world is going to be.
Sure.
I think there are a lot more people out there who have a lot of interesting ideas and things that we need to understand. But I want to go to Albuquerque. I want to go to Topeka. I want to go to Toledo and Pittsburgh and bring those people there. And I also want to go to early primary states, because here's the thing, and I'll probably get you in trouble for this. Like, if the guys at Third Way get their wish to be the only people who get to decide what the terms of debate are for 2028, like, we're going to get President J.D. Vance. And so I think we need what we're already seeing, which is a vigorous debate on ideology, ideas, policy, all of it. Because if it's going to be, what do you all believe in? We need to fix the ballroom. We need to take the gold out of the Oval Office. We need to take names off the Kennedy Center. Like, that's all unserious, right? Like, we need fighters. We need serious people. And I think we need to have big ideas going into 28. We should not be, chewing around the edges. We should not be saying, oh, we're going to play small ball. I think we need to be big. And so go to civicforum.org. I hope you'll help us out. We'll have a schedule of where we're going to be. I've already done 2 events, one in Richmond, Virginia, one in Los Angeles. I know I'm with my friend Tad Sturmer, who wrote a book. And so the podcast will be rebranded from the home front to the Civic Forum. So that will be launching again also next month. I hope people will go check it out.
Well, thanks, brother. Thanks, everyone, for listening to or watching us on That Trippi Show. Joe will be back next week. Make sure to join us at says.us, a civil social network for real human beings. This podcast will always be free as part of Lincoln Square. Check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. And if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. And we did get to a couple questions this week, even without Joe. You can send us questions to thattrippishow@gmail.com. I do read them, or leave us a question in a review on iTunes. See you next week.